The night my handyman drove past my own driveway and told me not to go inside, I almost laughed. I almost told him he'd made a wrong turn. I almost opened the door and stepped out anyway. I am grateful every single day that I didn't. I'm 67 years old, a retired high school principal from Gilbert, Arizona, and 16 months ago I buried my wife of 38 years in a cemetery off Greenfield Road, where the desert stretches flat and golden toward the mountains. Her name was Barbara. She had dark eyes and a laugh you could hear from 3 rooms away, and she died from breast cancer on a Tuesday afternoon in January while I was holding her hand and trying to remember the words to a hymn she loved. After Barbara died, the house got very quiet. That sounds obvious, maybe even trite, but I don't know how else to say it. We had lived there for 22 years, a 4-bedroom craftsman on a half-acre lot in one of Gilbert's older neighborhoods, with a covered patio and a mulberry tree Barbara had planted herself the year after we moved in. The county had appraised it at just over $1 million the previous fall. I had another $490,000 in my retirement accounts, 31 years of pension contributions from the Mesa Unified School District, carefully saved, carefully managed. I'm telling you the numbers because the numbers matter. They mattered to my son in ways I didn't understand until it was almost too late. After Barbara passed, my son started coming around more. He lived in Denver, where he'd been working for a wealth management firm for the better part of a decade. He and his wife had a nice condo, a new SUV, a lifestyle that looked expensive from the outside. He had flown into Phoenix maybe twice a year before his mother got sick. After the funeral, he started showing up once a month. At first I thought it was grief. I thought he was checking on me the way a good son checks on his father. He brought groceries sometimes. He asked whether I was sleeping. He sat at Barbara's kitchen table and drank coffee and asked careful questions about my finances. Who managed my accounts? Was everything in order? Had I thought about updating my will? I told him everything, because he was my son. My daughter-in-law came with him on most of those trips. She was pleasant enough, polite. She asked about Barbara's jewelry, whether I planned to keep everything or whether some pieces might eventually go to the grandchildren. Someday. There were no grandchildren yet. It was a strange thing to bring up. But I was 67 and grieving and alone in a house that still smelled like Barbara's lotion months after she was gone, and I wanted to believe that the people I loved were simply loving me back. That was my first mistake. Darnell came into my life in March, about 4 months after the funeral. My water heater had been making a sound like something dying, and a neighbor recommended him, said he was honest, showed up when he said he would, didn't overcharge. Darnell ran a one-man operation out of a white panel van with his name and number painted on the side in neat blue letters. He arrived exactly when he said he would. He was a black man in his mid-40s, medium build, with close-cropped hair going gray at the temples and the quiet, deliberate movements of someone who had been doing physical work his whole life and trusted his hands completely. He shook mine with a firm grip, looked me in the eye, and said, "Let's take a look at what's going on." The water heater was shot. He told me straight I needed a new unit. Here's what it costs, here's what's included, here's what isn't. No upsell, no runaround. While he worked, I made a pot of coffee and brought him a cup. Black, since I hadn't thought to ask. He thanked me and drank it without complaint, and when he was done he said, "You make good coffee, sir." "Call me by my first name," I said. I didn't want to be sir in my own home. He nodded. Fair enough. He finished the job in 2 hours, cleaned up after himself, and handed me a bill that was exactly what he'd quoted. I mentioned a leaking faucet in the hall bathroom while he was packing up his tools. He said he could come back Saturday. He came back Saturday, and the Saturday after that, and the one after that. There was always something small, a stuck garbage disposal, a cracked tile in the utility room, a light switch that sparked when you flipped it. But the truth is, I started finding reasons to call him because the house was too quiet and Darnell was easy company. He didn't pry. He didn't look at me with that particular kind of pity I'd grown to dread from neighbors and old colleagues. He just worked, and we talked about things that didn't hurt. The Diamondbacks, the construction on Gilbert Road, the way property taxes had gone up again. One Saturday in May I made sandwiches, turkey on sourdough, the kind Barbara used to make, and brought them out to the patio where Darnell was replacing a cracked fence post. He stopped and looked at the plate the way you look at something you weren't expecting and don't quite know how to receive. You didn't have to do that, he said. You've been here every weekend for 2 months, I said. Least I can do. He took the sandwich. We sat on the patio in the shade of Barbara's mulberry tree and ate, and that was the afternoon he told me about his daughter. Her name was Zara. She was 15, a sophomore at Perry High School in Gilbert, and she wanted to be a doctor. A pediatrician specifically. She'd decided at 11, after spending a week in the hospital with a bad appendix, and concluding that the people who took care of her were doing the most important work in the world. She's got the grades for it, Darnell said, not bragging but stating a fact he'd clearly lived with long enough to know was true. Takes AP Biology, AP Chemistry both. Already doing a volunteer shift at Mercy Hospital on Sundays. She sounds remarkable, I said. She is. He looked out at the yard. I try to remind myself of that when she's driving me crazy. I laughed. He laughed. It was the first time I'd laughed in weeks, and I noticed it the way you notice the first warm day after a long winter. A small shock of gratitude that the capacity is still there. My son called that evening. He asked how I was. Then he mentioned carefully that a colleague of his wife's had a mother who had developed memory issues and wished they'd caught it sooner. He said just as carefully that at my age it might be worth having a baseline cognitive evaluation, just to have on record, just in case. I told him I was fine. Of course you are, Dad, he said, but Mom's passing was a significant stressor. These things can sometimes accelerate underlying conditions, that's all I'm saying. I lay awake that night thinking about it, wondering if I had seemed confused recently, wondering if I had forgotten things I shouldn't have. I want you to understand something about grief. It makes you doubt yourself. You're operating on a low-level exhaustion that never fully lifts, and when someone who loves you plants a seed of worry in your mind, it grows in the dark without you even noticing. By July, I had started keeping a notepad on the kitchen counter to write down things I needed to remember, not because I was forgetting them, because my son had made me afraid that I might. That same month, my son and his wife flew down for a long weekend. My daughter-in-law had printed out information about an assisted living community in Scottsdale. Beautiful grounds, she said, a memory care wing that was state-of-the-art. She left the brochure on the coffee table without mentioning it directly, just set it where I'd see it. My son mentioned over dinner that he knew a neurologist in Phoenix. Wonderful doctor, he said, very thorough. He'd already spoken with the man. There was an opening in August. Would it hurt to just go? I told him I would think about it. After they left, I stood in Barbara's kitchen for a long time looking at that brochure. The photographs showed cheerful elderly people doing watercolors and playing shuffleboard in the sun. It looked like a prison with good landscaping. The following Saturday, Darnell came to fix a section of weather stripping on the garage door. I wasn't myself that day, distracted, quieter than usual, he noticed. You doing okay? He asked. My son wants me to see a neurologist, I said. He thinks I might be showing signs of cognitive decline. Darnell set down his tools. He looked at me with the same direct, careful attention he gave to a wall before he opened it up. Do you think that? He asked. I don't know, I said. I forget things sometimes. Everybody forgets things, Darnell said. You remembered the exact model number of that water heater when I needed to order the replacement part. You remembered my daughter's name from one visit to the next. You remembered I take my coffee black. He paused. That's not someone whose mind is slipping. I didn't answer. I'm not a doctor, he said, but I'd be careful about who's telling you that you're not okay, and why. He went back to work. I stood there in the garage with something uncomfortable turning over slowly in my chest. A thought I wasn't yet ready to look at directly. In August, I went to see the neurologist. Sasan had made the appointment himself at a practice in Scottsdale, Dr. Fenwick. Silver-haired, careful smile, the kind of warm authority that makes you feel like you're in good hands before you've had time to wonder whose hands those actually are. His office walls were covered in diplomas. His receptionist offered me water twice. The tests were standard. What year is it? Count backward from 100 by sevens. Draw a clock. Remember these 5 words and repeat them in 10 minutes. I thought I did fine. 4 out of 5 words. The clock looked right to me. Dr. Fenwick reviewed his notes for a long time. He looked up with an expression that said, "What I'm about to tell you is difficult." He told me he was seeing early signs of cognitive impairment. Not severe, he said, but present. A pattern of subtle hesitation. Minor processing delays. He used phrases like consistent with early-stage decline and the kind of thing families often wish they'd addressed sooner. He wrote me a prescription. He recommended structured living arrangements within the next 6 to 12 months. And then he mentioned, almost in passing, that my son had called him ahead of the appointment. He said it the way you mention something that seems routine when it isn't routine at all. I drove home from Scottsdale in the 104-degree August heat with a prescription on the passenger seat and a feeling in my stomach I couldn't name. Something between grief and suspicion and a shame I didn't yet understand was completely misplaced. The next Saturday, Darnell came to check the irrigation drip lines. I told him about the appointment, all of it. He listened without interrupting. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment. "Was your son in the exam room?" he asked. "He spoke with the doctor in the hallway first," I said, before I went in. Darnell crouched down by the irrigation valve. "Okay," he said. "Just that, okay." He stayed an extra hour. When he was done and walking to his van, he stopped at the end of the driveway. "If anything ever feels off," he said, "call me. Doesn't matter what time." What I didn't know then was what Darnell had heard 3 Saturdays before that conversation. It was the first Saturday in August. Darnell had come to replace the thermostat on the HVAC unit, which lived in a mechanical closet just inside the garage door. He'd parked on the side street, worried about blocking the driveway, so when my son and his wife arrived that afternoon and pulled straight in, they never saw the van. I was in the backyard with the sprinklers running. I couldn't hear anything from out there, but Darnell could. The mechanical closet shared a thin wall with the laundry room. My daughter-in-law was standing at the laundry room counter, talking to my son in a low voice that traveled through drywall like the house had no walls at all. "The appointment is confirmed for the 14th, she said. "Fenwick already knows what we need. He's done this before." My son said something Darnell couldn't fully make out. "It doesn't matter if the tests come back fine," she said. "He just needs to document the pattern. Once there's a diagnosis in writing, we move forward with the guardianship petition. 60 days, maybe 90. Darnell stopped working. "And the house," my son said. "We listed in the spring. Market strong in Gilbert. We should clear close to asking." A pause. "The retirement accounts go through the estate attorney once we have guardianship. She already knows the process." Darnell stood completely still in that mechanical closet. Then he reached into his shirt pocket and took out his phone. His hands were steady. He pressed record. He told me later that he almost didn't, that he stood there for 10 full seconds weighing it. The legal exposure, the risk to his business, the possibility that I wouldn't believe him, that I would take my son's word over a handyman's and that would be the end of it. He thought about all of that. Then my daughter-in-law said, "He trusts us. That's the whole advantage. He won't even see it coming." And Darnell kept recording. 3 weeks later, he sat down at my kitchen table. He had never done that before, always worked, never lingered past the job. He set his phone between us. "I need you to hear something," he said, "all of it, before you say anything." He played me the recording. I sat in Barbara's kitchen and listened to my son's voice and my daughter-in-law's voice coming out of Darnell's phone, quiet and completely clear, talking about my house and my money and my manufactured diagnosis like they were planning a real estate transaction. 60 days. The estate attorney. The spring listing. He won't even see it coming. I didn't cry. I sat very still and felt something drain out of me, the way the color leaves a person's face when they've heard something they cannot unhear. "There's more," Darnell said. He played me a second recording, from 2 weeks after the first, when he had come back for a shower valve and they hadn't heard him arrive. My daughter-in-law on the phone with someone, a lawyer, from the sound of it, going over the guardianship timeline. "Once the diagnosis is in the system," she said, "it won't matter what he says. His word against a physician's." I put my hand flat on the table and held still. "I'm sorry," Darnell said. "I'm sorry I waited. I wanted to be certain. I needed enough that you couldn't dismiss it." I looked at him. This man who'd fixed my water heater and eaten turkey sandwiches on my patio and knew that his daughter wanted to be a pediatrician someday. This man who had, by accident and by choice, become the only person standing between me and the loss of everything I had left. "Why didn't you just walk away?" I asked. The question came out smaller than I meant it to. Darnell thought for a moment. "When I was about 25, he said, I watched a man back his truck into an old woman's car in a parking lot, look around and drive off. I was sitting in my car at the edge of the lot. All I had to do was stay quiet." He paused. "I've never forgotten the look on her face when she came out and found it. She just stood there. I should have honked. I should have blocked his truck. I didn't." He looked at the phone on the table. "I'm not doing that again." We sat there in the kitchen with the August heat pressing at the windows. "We go to the police," Darnell said. "Now, before your son comes back." I nodded. I didn't trust my voice to carry words. He drove. I sat in the passenger seat of his white panel van and watched Gilbert go by, the palm trees and the strip malls and the new subdivisions that were all desert when Barbara and I had bought our house, and I thought about my son as a boy. How he was afraid of thunderstorms. How Barbara used to go into his room and sit with him in the dark until they passed. How one summer I'd coached his little league team, and he'd cried when they lost the championship game, and I told him the point was never winning. The point was showing up. I had believed that. I had thought I'd taught him that. Detective Reyes at the Gilbert Police Department was a compact woman in her late 30s, who listened to both recordings twice without interrupting and asked precise questions about dates, amounts, and names. When the second recording finished the second time, she set her pen down. "Play them one more time," she said. 4 days later, she had pulled Dr. Fenwick's records and found 2 prior complaints from families alleging fraudulent cognitive evaluations. She found a wire transfer from my son's personal account, $8,000, sent 3 weeks before my appointment, logged in Fenwick's books as a consulting fee. She pulled my son's financial records and found what he had never told me. He was $340,000 in debt, a failed business loan, a collapsed startup investment, private lenders now threatening legal action. His salary was being garnished. He had missed mortgage payments on the Denver condo. My house, my retirement accounts, 340,000 reasons to make me disappear. My son and his wife were arrested at Phoenix Sky Harbor Airport when they landed the following Thursday, walking off the jetway thinking everything was fine. Detective Reyes had timed it that way. She let them board in Denver. She let them land. She let them walk into the terminal. Dr. Fenwick was arrested at his Scottsdale office Friday morning. His medical license was suspended the same day. 9 other patients, Detective Reyes told me. 9 other families he had done this to before me. I was sitting on Darnell's back porch in Mesa when she called with the update. Darnell's daughter Zara had given me her bedroom without a word of complaint. Just stripped the bed, remade it with clean sheets, and told me where the extra blankets were. She was 16, and she had her father's way of doing what needed doing without making it into a production. The trial was the following spring. I won't walk through every day of it, but I'll tell you what mattered. My son's attorney argued financial duress, desperation, terrible choices under impossible pressure. The prosecution pointed out that guardianship by fraud is a form of violence. It takes a person's autonomy, their identity, their right to make a single decision about their own life. It just leaves no visible marks. My son received 4 years in federal prison. My daughter-in-law received 18 months. Dr. Fenwick lost his medical license permanently and received 3 years, with additional charges pending on the other 9 cases. I gave a victim impact statement. I had written it the night before at Darnell's kitchen table, crossing things out and starting over until only what needed to be said remained. I looked at my son across that courtroom, at the suit that didn't quite fit right, at the face I had known since the day he was born, and I told him about the summer he was 8 and afraid of thunderstorms, about Barbara sitting with him in the dark, about the Little League game and what I'd said about showing up. "You showed up," I said, "but for the wrong reasons, and that is something I don't know if I'll ever fully understand." He didn't look at me. I don't know if that made it better or worse. I suspect it doesn't matter. 2 years have passed since that August morning when Darnell set his phone on my kitchen table and said, "I need you to hear something." I still live in my house on that half-acre lot in Gilbert. Barbara's mulberry tree is full this year. She would have said something about that, noted it the way she noted small things that were good and worth saying out loud. I am not in any memory care facility. I do not have cognitive decline. I take no prescription for a condition I never had. Darnell still comes by most Saturdays, not because anything is broken, because we've gotten into the habit and neither of us sees a reason to change it. I make coffee. We sit on the patio. We argue about baseball. Zara is 17 now and has been accepted to a summer research program at the Mayo Clinic in Scottsdale. 40 students selected from across Arizona for a program in medical research and clinical observation. When she called her father with the news, Darnell was in my backyard fixing a loose gate hinge, and he shouted loud enough that the neighbor's dog started barking from 3 houses down. I am paying for her pre-med education when the time comes. It is not something I offered after deliberating. It is something I knew the moment I decided. She calls me every Sunday evening. Last week she told me about a 7-year-old boy who had come into the hospital with a broken arm, terrified, and how she had sat with him and told him knock-knock jokes until the doctor was ready, and how he had laughed. That's why I want to do this, she said. I thought about Barbara sitting in the dark with a little boy who was afraid of thunder. I thought about all the ways love announces itself, through patience, through presence, through a knock-knock joke in a fluorescent-lit hallway. I know, I said. Keep going. I think about my son sometimes, about the distance between who I believed he was and who he turned out to be, and whether that gap was always there, or whether it opened slowly over years of choices I never saw him make. I don't have the answer. I may never have it. What I know is this. The man who saved my life came in a white panel van with his name painted on the side in blue letters. He charged me a fair price. He drank his coffee black. He stayed an extra hour more times than I can count because he could see something wasn't right, and he refused to look the other way. Family isn't the people who are supposed to love you. It's the people who actually do, quietly, without announcement, at some cost to themselves, for no reason except that it's the right thing and they aren't willing to be the kind of person who doesn't do it. I'm 67 years old. I still sit on my patio in the evenings when the desert finally cools and the stars come out sharp and clear over Gilbert, and I think about the night everything changed. The night a man drove past my driveway instead of pulling in, and because of that choice, because of one person who refused to look away, I am still here.